the fancy crystal glasses tinged against the delicate plates as my sister, Emma, hosted another one of her over-the-top family dinners. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, watching my brother-in-law, Daniel, who loved calling himself a business genius, hold everyone's attention like always. At 42, he acted like being a CEO made him royalty, his words oozing the kind of confidence that comes from never really failing. And that's how I closed the Wilson deal, he finished, soaking up the impressed nods from our family. Biggest deal this year. Some people just have a natural gift for business. His eyes flicked to me, his smirk making my stomach tighten. I sipped my wine, already knowing where this was going. These monthly dinners had become Daniel's favorite time to take little digs at me. Speaking of business, he turned to me fully. Lily, how's that little, what is it again, your consulting project? It's going well, I said calmly, noticing how Emma sat up straighter, like she was waiting for drama. At 38, I'd learned the best way to deal with Daniel was to stay unshaken. Still working from your kitchen table, right? He laughed, swirling his stupidly expensive whiskey. Come on, Lily, how can clients take you seriously without a real office? Mom shifted in her seat but stayed quiet. Dad suddenly became very interested in his food. They'd picked their side in this family a long time ago, and it wasn't mine. My clients seem happy, I said, cutting into my salmon. Daniel had insisted on ordering from the fanciest restaurant in town, another way to show off. Clients? Daniel snorted. You mean those little shops downtown? Listen, if you ever want real business advice. Actually, a deep voice cut in. Her client list is impressive. Everyone turned to James Wilson, the James Wilson from the deal Daniel had just been bragging about. He'd been sitting quietly at the other end of the table, the honored guest Daniel had been sucking up to all night. In fact, James continued, setting down his fork, my son's company has been trying to get on her waiting list for months. Lily's firm is very selective. The table went dead silent. I heard Emma's sharp gasp. Daniel's face went from smug to confused in half a second. Your son's company? Daniel choked out. Ryan Wilson, CEO of Vertex Tech, James said, smiling at me. Lily's firm handled the Carter Group buyout last year. Flawless work. When Ryan told me who was behind it, I couldn't believe someone so young pulled off such a huge deal. But then, real skill doesn't need a fancy office to prove it, right? I watched Daniel's face turn pale. The Carter buyout was a $400 million deal, the kind people in his circles obsessed over, and I'd done it all from my home office, the one he'd just mocked. I had no idea, Daniel stammered, his usual swagger gone. Clearly, I said, letting myself smile just a little. More wine, anyone? Emma's hand trembled as she grabbed her glass. Mom's mouth hung open. Dad was staring at me like he'd never really seen me before. Lily, Daniel started, his voice suddenly sweet. Why didn't you say something? That you handle huge deals? That your little project works with top companies? I set my glass down slowly. You never asked, Daniel. You were too busy talking about yourself. James chuckled. Speaking of which, Lily, I hope you'll consider taking on Vertex Tech. Ryan's desperate to work with you. Of course, Daniel jumped in. Family helps family. I'm sure Lily would. Sorry, I cut him off smoothly. My schedule's full, but, James, tell Ryan to send over his proposal. I'll personally review it, Daniel choked out, his face turning beet red. The Wilson deal he'd been bragging about, his so-called biggest deal of the quarter, was peanuts compared to what I'd handled for Carter Group. And now James Wilson, his golden ticket client, was looking at me with respect while barely glancing Daniel's way. Emma finally found her voice, though it shook. Lily, why didn't you ever tell us? Tell you what, Emma? I set my napkin down slowly. That while you and Daniel laughed about my little side project, I was building one of the top consulting firms in the city? That the home office you mocked has closed deals worth billions? I tilted my head. Would you have even believed me? Or would you have just found another way to make me seem small? The truth sat between us like a brick. They wouldn't have believed me. Not when their whole world revolved around Daniel the business genius and me as the pitiful little sister who never quite made it. But, your clothes, Emma stammered, gesturing at my simple dress, your tiny house, your old car. Because I don't need to perform success, I said, real wins don't need a flashy costume. James nodded, lips twitching. That's exactly why your reputation is so strong. Lily, no noise, just results. His eyes flicked to Daniel. Unlike some people. Daniel's knuckles turned white around his whiskey glass. His whole carefully crafted image was cracking, and with it, his throne in this family. But I wasn't finished. James, I said, ignoring Daniel's desperate stare, I'd love to hear more about Vertex Tech's plans. Dinner next week? There's a great new French spot on 5th. Daniel jumped in, sweating. I'm a member there, I could. Funny, I smiled. I own it. Small investment. Really, not some big corporate thing, but it does all right. The restaurant. The one Daniel had begged for months to get into. The one he'd bragged about at Christmas. He never knew every time he ate there. He was sitting in my chairs, eating off my plates. Emma's wineglass hit the table with a clink, red splashing across the white linen, but for once, she didn't scramble to fix it. She just gaped at me, really seeing me for the first time in a decade. Here's the thing about winning, I said, standing up. It doesn't need witnesses. While you were all clapping for Daniel's promotions and Emma's tennis club gossip, I was building something that lasts. I grabbed my bag, no designer logo, just perfect leather from a craftsman I'd backed when no one else would. Dinner was lovely. Emma, James, my assistant will set up that meeting. As I reached the door, Daniel's voice cracked. Lily, wait, maybe we could talk? I turned just enough to see his flushed face. Talk about what? How you spent years belittling my work. How you only care now that you know I'm outplaying you. I shrugged. Pass. The silence tasted sweeter than the wine. Emma slumped in her chair like a deflated balloon, her perfect dinner party in shambles. Mom and Dad suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. And Daniel? He looked like someone had just kicked his expensive shoes out from under him. Send me the bill, Emma, I called over my shoulder. We both know how Daniel feels about wasting money on charity cases. The door clicked shut behind me, leaving them to choke on their fancy food, and the realization they'd spent years underestimating the wrong sister. But here's the kicker, they still had no idea this was just the beginning, because what Daniel didn't know, what he was about to discover the hard way, was that his precious merger, the one he thought would save his floundering career, I'd been pulling its strings for months. The morning after, my phone blew up before my coffee finished brewing. Emma, we need to talk. Daniel, call me urgent. Mom, your father and I are concerned. I silenced them all. Right now, I had more important things to focus on, like dismantling Daniel's empire brick by brick. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom in my home office, the same one Daniel loved mocking. Mr. Wilson's on line 1. I grabbed the receiver, grinning at my wall of monitors. James, tell me Daniel's having the morning I imagine. He's called my office 6 times since 5 a.m. James chuckled. I think he finally noticed someone's been buying up his company's shares. Ah yes, those anonymous purchases through 3 shell companies? All me. My phone buzzed again, Emma's third attempt today. I declined it with my thumb. Your sister's persistent, James noted. Funny how that happens when people realize you're not their punching bag anymore, I said, watching another 2% of Daniel's company shift into my control. The unraveling. 3 days later, Daniel ambushed me outside my favorite cafe, the one he'd sneered at last month for being too hipster. Lily, please, he begged, his usually perfect hair sticking up in panic. Whatever issues we have, this is my career. I took a slow sip of my lavender latte. Remember when you called this place a dump? Funny story, I own 20% of it. His face went sheet white. I was wrong. Okay, but if this merger fails, what? You'll actually have to work for once? I tilted my head. Build something yourself instead of writing daddy's connections? My phone pinged, legal team confirming we'd hit 51% ownership. Daniel's phone chose that moment to buzz with a board alert. When he looked up, I saw the exact second he connected the dots. You, his voice cracked. You're the silent buyer. I showed him James' latest text. Ryan's team sent their proposal. Shame about Daniel's leadership. Could have been a great partnership. The fall. The board meeting was everything I'd dreamed. I strolled into Daniel's sacred conference room and took his seat at the head of the table. The old money directors blinked at me like confused owls. Gentlemen, I said, tossing folders across the table, let's discuss why company value dropped 18% under Daniel's leadership. For 40 glorious minutes, I dismantled every bad decision, every cut corner, every time he'd chosen flash over actual business. Daniel finally stood, face purple. You can't do this. I built this company. I slid the ownership papers across the table. Actually, I own it now. And my first act? Canceling your golden parachute. The room erupted. Daniel looked like he might vomit on his $3,000 shoes. Oh, and Daniel? I added as he slunk toward the door. You might want to sell your golf clubs. Country clubs tend to revoke memberships when you're unemployed. Epilogue, 5 years later. The company thrived under new leadership. Daniel's comeback consulting firm lasted 11 months. At family dinners now, I catch him staring at my second-hand watch and thrift store dress with new understanding. The same watch that bought his company, the same dress I wore to dismantle his career. My home office wall sports a new framed photo, Daniel's face during that board meeting, best $12 I ever spent at CVS. Because here's the thing about revenge, the sweetest kind isn't loud, it's the quiet moment when they finally realize. The person they underestimated was the one holding all the cards all along. And me? I'm still that girl in the simple clothes, working from home. Only now, when Daniel passes me in his leased Honda, he knows the truth. Real power doesn't need to shout, it just needs to win.